The NFL is the most powerful sports league on the planet. It generates over $20 billion a year. Its teams sell out stadiums every Sunday. Billionaires beg to own a franchise. But behind the cheerful highlight reels and primetime spectacles, there is a war being waged. And it started with one man, one text message, and a story so explosive, it went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. His name is Brian Flores, a black coach from Brooklyn, a son of Honduran immigrants, a man who climbed every rung of the NFL ladder and then dared to look the league in the eye and say, "You are rigged, and I can prove it." As of this week, the Supreme Court has refused to stop him. The lawsuit is going to trial, and it now involves nearly every single team in the NFL. This is the story of how one coach decided to burn it all down and why the entire league should be terrified. To understand why Brian Flores filed this lawsuit, you first have to understand who he is and what he sacrificed to get to the top. Flores grew up in the Brownsville neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York. Tough neighborhood, real life. He played linebacker at Boston College, but was never drafted. Football as a player wasn't going to be his path, so he found another one. In 2004, he walked into the New England Patriots facility as a scouting assistant, the lowest rung on the ladder. He spent the next 15 years working under Bill Belichick, one of the greatest coaches the sport has ever seen. He earned 4 Super Bowl rings. He climbed from scout to special teams assistant, to safeties coach, to linebackers coach, to the man calling defensive plays for the most successful dynasty in modern NFL history. By 2019, the NFL took notice. The Miami Dolphins handed him the keys. Brian Flores became a head coach, and in Miami, he did what nobody expected. He inherited a disaster, a roster being stripped for parts, a team in full rebuild mode. In 2020, he went 10-6. In 2021, he went 9-8, including a historic 7-game winning streak that nearly carried his team to the playoffs, back-to-back winning seasons, something Miami hadn't done since the early 2000s. By any measure, by any fair measure, Brian Flores had earned his seat at the table. Then, on January 10th, 2022, one day after his Dolphins beat Belichick's own Patriots in the final game of the regular season, Stephen Ross called him into his office, then fired him. The official reason? The organization wasn't functioning at the level Ross wanted. No playoffs, personality clashes with the GM. Brian Flores went home that night with no job, a head full of questions, and a story he was about to tell the whole world. When you get fired from a head coaching job in the NFL, the expectation is that you move quietly into the background, maybe take a coordinator role, keep your head down, don't make waves. Brian Flores was not going to do that. After his firing, he quickly became one of the hottest coaching candidates in the league. The New York Giants had a vacancy. They brought Flores in for an interview. This was his shot, a chance to get back on top, a top market team, a historic franchise. Except, 3 days before that interview even took place, Flores got a text message. It was from Bill Belichick. Belichick apparently intending to reach Brian Daboll, the Buffalo Bills offensive coordinator, who was also interviewing for the job, accidentally texted Flores instead. And what that text said was devastating. It congratulated him on getting the Giants job, the one he hadn't interviewed for yet. Belichick quickly followed up. He said he'd made a mistake. He thought Flores was Daboll, but the damage was done. Flores now had proof, in writing, that the Giants had already made their decision before he walked in the door. His interview was theater, a performance put on to satisfy the NFL's Rooney Rule, the policy that requires teams to interview minority candidates for head coaching positions. He went to the interview anyway. He sat in that room, he answered every question, and he already knew the outcome. On February 1st, 2022, less than a month after being fired, Brian Flores filed a federal class action lawsuit. He named the NFL, the New York Giants, the Miami Dolphins, and the Denver Broncos. The lawsuit described the NFL as a league that lives in the past, rife with racism in its hiring and promotion of black coaches and executives. He wasn't just suing over one text message. He was alleging a systemic, league-wide pattern of discrimination, sham interviews, Fake diversity, a plantation mentality at the top of the most powerful sports organization in America. The NFL denied everything, but Flores wasn't bluffing, and he was not done. The Belichick text message was the headline, but what was buried inside Flores' lawsuit was arguably even more explosive. He alleged that when he interviewed for the Denver Broncos head coaching job back in 2019, then general manager John Elway and other members of the front office showed up over an hour late to their meeting and appeared to be hungover. Think about that. You are a black candidate interviewing for one of the most prestigious jobs in professional sports. You prepare for weeks, you fly across the country, and the people responsible for hiring you can't even show up sober and on time. Because, Flores alleged, they had already decided who they were hiring. Then there was the story about Miami Dolphins owner Stephen Ross. Flores claimed that Ross pressured him multiple times to deliberately lose games in order to secure a higher draft pick. In NFL circles, this is called tanking. It's considered a massive integrity violation. He also alleged that Ross offered him $1 million per loss if he would intentionally throw games. Flores said he refused. He also claimed Ross encouraged him to tamper with a then under contract player to recruit him to Miami ahead of free agency. Flores said he refused that too, and he believed that his refusal to play along with Ross's schemes was a direct reason he was fired. The Dolphins responded by denying everything vehemently, but the NFL's own investigation later found Miami guilty of tampering violations, stripping the team of draft picks as punishment. Was that a coincidence? You can decide. Two more coaches, Steve Wilks and Ray Horton, joined the lawsuit. Wilks alleged the Arizona Cardinals hired him as a so-called bridge coach, with no real intention of giving him a fair shot at the permanent role. Horton alleged the Tennessee Titans gave him a sham interview for a head coaching position in 2016. 3 coaches, multiple teams, decades of grievances. The NFL tried to shut it all down before it ever saw a courtroom. Here's something most fans don't know about how the NFL operates. Every player, every coach, every employee, when they sign a contract with an NFL team, they agree to something called an arbitration clause. And that arbitration clause means that if a dispute arises, it doesn't go to a public courtroom. It goes to a private arbitration process. And here's the key detail. In the NFL, the arbitrator is Commissioner Roger Goodell, the man who runs the league, the man whose salary is paid by the owners, the man who has every financial and institutional incentive to protect those same owners. He would be the judge. The NFL moved immediately to force Flores into that arbitration process. They didn't want this lawsuit anywhere near a public courtroom. They didn't want discovery. They didn't want documents. They didn't want cameras. They wanted this buried in a private hearing room with Goodell running the show. Flores' legal team fought back hard. They argued, and a federal appeals court agreed, that employers cannot force employees to arbitrate statutory employment discrimination claims before the employer's own chief executive. That's not arbitration. That's a rigged game. The NFL appealed all the way to the top. They took it to the United States Supreme Court, and on May 26, 2026, the Supreme Court declined to hear the NFL's appeal. That's it. That's the end of the road for the NFL's legal strategy. The case is going to trial. An open court with a jury, with discovery, with depositions, with documents that the NFL has spent 4 years trying to keep hidden. The only dissenting voice on the Supreme Court was Justice Brett Kavanaugh, the lone justice who believed the NFL's arbitration argument had merit. Everyone else stepped aside and said, "Let this go to trial." And then, just weeks before that ruling, something even bigger happened. Flores subpoenaed 25 more NFL teams, on top of the 6 already named in the lawsuit, demanding information about their hiring practices. That brings nearly the entire league into the case. 31 out of 32 franchises. The only team potentially excluded? His current employer, the Minnesota Vikings. Brian Flores has turned a personal grievance into a league-wide reckoning. So where does this go from here? The case is heading to trial. Flores is still coaching, currently the defensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings. He is still inside the league, still building film, still working with players, and still fighting in court at the same time. The NFL has to prepare for the worst. Discovery in a case this size means lawyers digging through internal emails, hiring committee notes, interview evaluations, ownership communications, things that were never meant to be seen in public, things the league has every reason to want buried. And the Rooney Rule, that policy that's been held up for over 2 decades as proof the NFL cares about diversity, is now under attack from both sides. Flores says it's a paper shield used to fake compliance while hiring decisions are made in back rooms. And at the same time, state attorneys general and federal agencies are arguing the rule itself constitutes racial discrimination against white candidates. The NFL has built its diversity narrative for years. The Rooney Rule was the centerpiece. Now that centerpiece is being used as Exhibit A in a lawsuit against them and as a political target from the outside. There is no clean exit. Brian Flores could have taken the coordinator job after being fired and stayed quiet. He could have collected his paycheck, coached his linebackers, and let the machine roll on. Instead, he chose to stand in front of the most powerful sports league on earth and say, "I was used, we were all used, and I have receipts." He risked his career. He said so himself when he filed the lawsuit, that he understood he might never coach at the highest level again by going public. And yet, here he is, still coaching, still fighting, and now, with the Supreme Court on his side, heading into the biggest legal battle the NFL has ever faced. Whether Flores wins or loses in court, one thing is already certain: the NFL will never be able to pretend this conversation isn't happening. The lawsuit is going to trial. The subpoenas are issued. The whole league is watching, and so is the rest of America. That's the Brian Flores story, and it's far from over. As this trial moves forward, we'll be covering every major development right here on the channel. If this kind of deep dive documentary content is what you're here for, hit subscribe, drop a comment below telling me whose side you're on, and share this with any NFL fan you know, because this is bigger than football.